George Peck, Consulting Systems Engineer from Cisco, who's going to talk about application-centric infrastructures, the next generation of virtualization. George?
Thank you, Neil. Happy ACI Wednesday, everybody. My name is George Peck. I'm with Cisco, and I'm really thankful to cStor for giving me a few minutes to talk to you today. I want to talk a little bit about some of the demands that we're seeing in IT. There's a lot of change in the way that we consume everything in the world today, really, and a lot of those changes are really placing some big demands on us as IT providers, on our IT departments within our companies. There's a lot of pressures, a lot of changes happening, a lot of areas to consider when you think about these new demands, but I've kind of organized these into 4 different areas, really looking at managing change, dealing with differences and changes in the way that we consume applications, the way that we develop applications, the way that we provision applications, and managing to do that in a very cost-effective way. As we do that, a lot of us are looking at cloud and looking at what our cloud strategy is going to be. A lot of us in IT are looking to become brokers of IT, providing IT as a service, kind of separating it out from where it might live, where it might be provisioned, and really looking at getting that best, most agile, business relevant service delivered to the businesses that we support. As we do that, we have to consider a lot of things. We have to consider the fact that we now have to organize and analyze more and more data, and this continues to grow every single day, every single week, every single year. And so we have to be able to manage that data, we have to be able to analyze that data, and we have to be able to provide insights and results from the data that we're analyzing back to the business in near real time and even moving towards real time, so that the business can compete and so that the business can make the decisions that it needs to make, provide the services that it needs to provide to its customers. And as we think of all of these things, and Neil mentioned this, we certainly have to consider very strongly, we have to consider security. As more and more of our industry, as our commerce becomes digital, it becomes subject to different and new types of attacks, and so we really have to consider security as kind of an overarching demand on us as IT and our security peers as well. So when we think about what's happening in data centers and some of the progress that we've made in data centers over the past few years, as we've moved from consolidation towards virtualization, and really now moving more towards automation, all of these things we've done to make our data centers more efficient, to make them more cost effective. We're now moving more into an arena where we need to make them very quick to operate, very quick, simple to operate, very quick to respond to the needs of the business. And so we feel like we're at the cusp of this shift from kind of a traditional data center to a cloud-ready data center. And what do I mean by that? Really looking at the way that the infrastructure, the way that the services provided by data centers changes, and the way that we consume that needs to become more flexible, it needs to become more automated, we need to become more agile as IT providers. And we need to think about this not just from the perspective of what's happening with applications today or what's happening with the services that we provide today, but into the future as well. We look at the next 5 years, we see digitization becoming increasingly prevalent. We see data continuing to explode. And so we really need to be able to provision, to consume infrastructure and IT services in a very different way than we've been provisioning them before. And that's really where ACI comes in. As we look at moving from traditional data centers or even virtualized and automated data centers to cloud-like data centers, and as we move to providing IT as a service, whatever that might look like to the end customer, we need to provide the ways for them to consume that. And there's some challenges in doing that, right? One is we've got to be able to do it faster, and we've got to be able to do it in an automated way. we need it to be open and programmable because we need all the components of that service to be able to interact with the users of that service in various different ways. And so we can look at this really in terms of what are those components of that cloud operational model. What do we need to optimize in order to provide IT as a service? And it starts with infrastructure, right? It really starts at that foundational layer with the infrastructure that exists in our data centers today, the infrastructure that may exist in data center space that we're renting through use of a public cloud provider. But that infrastructure is very important. And the thing that's important about that infrastructure right now is that we can't continue to provision the infrastructure the way that we might have been provisioning it in the past. We need to be able to automate it. We need to be able to make it available to our customers in different ways. One of those ways, and maybe some of you are seeing pressures to start providing infrastructure in this way, is through self-service. So the way that this is kind of the transition of the way we consume things in our personal life moving into the way we consume things in our business life. We want that self-service catalog, and we want to be able, for certain areas within the company, they need to be able to actually use that self-service catalog to get infrastructure that might live in our data center, whether that's networking, whether it's compute power, whether it's data storage, any of those types of things. And so we need the infrastructure to be able to be automated. We need to provide an orchestration layer for that. And ACI works in conjunction with all of these things. So when you think of these challenges towards moving towards that cloud operational model, ACI really solves the problems of agility and automation. And I'll talk a little bit about how that works. It solves the problems of needing to be an open programmable component of that infrastructure. It provides for multi-tenancy and segmentation between anything that you need to kind of split out on the network. It provides security, and it's very cost-effective to operate. So let's talk a little bit about what it is and how it provides those things. ACI is really an industry-leading best practice data center network architecture. Now, why start at the network? The reason that we start with the network is because the network is crucially important to all of the things that I've talked about in terms of the way that we provision and consume IT services. And the network is probably also one of the last areas in our data centers that's actually changed and is actually becoming more able to be automated. The other thing to note here is that the way that traffic flows within the data centers has changed over the past few years as well. Many applications, think of a Hadoop cluster where we do replication across the network to various nodes in a Hadoop cluster. Most of the traffic now in the data centers stays within the data centers and moves between devices in the data centers. It's what we call east-west traffic. And it's a little bit different than the way traffic used to flow, where a lot of traffic would flow from one application or one server within the data center out to an end device, usually a desktop computer. That's still important, but that traffic pattern has shifted. And so ACI starts at the network. It's that flat network. It uses a spine leaf topology. And that might be a little bit different from the networks that you see in your data centers today. A lot of the data center networks that are still in existence today are a different architecture, a different design, and they're optimized more for that north-south traffic. So as we look to how do we prepare for the next 5 years and today, we need to move to something optimized for east-west traffic, and that's that spine leaf architecture. It does a couple of things, right? Every device that I plug into this fabric is now 1 or 2 hops away from any other device. So traffic between those devices is optimized. It's a very short path. Traffic is very quick. There's very low latency. And so it also scales very easily. If I need to add more ports, I just add more leaf switches. If I need to add more bandwidth, I just add more spine switches. A couple of other quick things about ACI to note. It is managed as a system. So traditionally today when we manage our networks and we manage our switches, we manage them as individual devices. And if we need to make a change to an application, maybe that application has different connectivity requirements now, we actually have to go across our entire network and make those changes to any of the switches or other devices that application touches. So any device that's connected would have to have all of its network devices receive those changes as well. And so this is much more efficient in terms of that as well. We're managing it as a system. If we need to make a change, we make that change in one spot. We also provide fabric port services. So we provide the ability to provide not just layer 2 and layer 3 connectivity between devices, but other network services as well. Things like load balancing, things like firewalls, all of those types of things. One other thing I'll talk about that we do here is this is what we call a whitelist model. So this can actually secure the data center or make securing the data center a little bit easier because devices that are plugged in do not communicate with each other until we have what we call a contract or a policy in place between those devices. So that's really what ACI is at this point. I want to talk a little bit about how successful we've been with ACI. ACI is foundationally built on a hardware switching line, the Nexus 9000, and the APIC controller. It's been on the market for a little over a year and a half. And you can kind of see what the numbers show here are the numbers of customers that Cisco has for the Nexus 9000 platform. So we're at a little over 6,000 customers as of today. The Nexus 9K can actually act like a regular network switch, or it can be an ACI fabric using the Cisco APIC controller. And so you see that number of 1,400. That's the number of customers that are right now using the Nexus 9000 as part of an ACI fabric. And then the other number that I think is important here is the number of ecosystem partners. When you think about the network services that you provide within the data center, things like firewalls, those might be provided by Cisco infrastructure. They might be provided by someone else's infrastructure. And if you look at what we've done with ACI, we've opened that system up. We've got a pretty big and growing number of partners who are able to write to that system and integrate in that way. So it's a very open solution. I want to talk about one of our customers. Symantec is one of our early adopter customers for ACI, and this is kind of some of the projections. And a couple of things that I really want to call out on this slide. First of all, if you look at the quote, you can see that planning, design, and execution for ACI for Symantec, which is a pretty large enterprise type customer, they were able to do that in about 4.5 months. So the system is pretty easy to implement. It can be the implementation of it because of the fact that we're managing it as a system rather than a group of disparate or related boxes. It implements pretty quickly. If you look at some of the ROI numbers here, 11-month payback of the initial investment. That's a very quick payback in today's environment. Symantec is a software company, and so application development lifecycle is key to them. And you can see that over 5 years they expect to have an 87% faster application development cycle. That's because when they provision an environment for development, they provision it all at once, networks included with that. When they deprovision it, it all goes away. That all of those resources are back in the pool available for the next time we provision it. So something that was a really quick help for Symantec really early on is a decision that they made as a business to actually split into 2 publicly traded companies. So Symantec remains and is devoted entirely to security. Veritas, kind of a blast from the past name, has come back and is now the line of storage products that were formerly under the Symantec environment. What they were able to do with ACI, because ACI is a multi-tenant environment, is they were able to actually do that split on the network on the same infrastructure, providing all the separation that they needed in terms of security, in terms of compliance, and just simply set up Veritas as a separate tenant on the same physical infrastructure. And they're able to host that as if they're separate companies until Veritas actually makes their decisions for their own infrastructure. And so as you can kind of see, this is a case where that ACI decision had very tangible, not only in terms of payback, but very tangible business results in terms of how they were able to handle this, this acquisition. So I mentioned policy in terms of ACI. I want to talk just briefly about how that works. When we think about all of the things that we need to configure on the network when we bring a new application into our data center or into our environment, there's a few things that you might have to consider. And what ACI does is it actually lets us load all of these attributes into what we call an application profile. And you can think of the application profile as really a couple of things, right? It is the connectivity, security, quality of service, policy between the nodes of your application. Another way to look at this is simply documenting what the application needs. Now, a lot of us know that we should document what our application needs. A lot of us don't necessarily do that. Well, the ACI policy actually documents that for us, and I'll talk about how that's a benefit as we wrap up here. So the ACI policy, it becomes that application network profile, and it actually defines the connectivity for our application. Now I'm showing in this picture a 3-tier application. You may or may not have 3-tier applications. You may have 100-tier applications. It doesn't really matter. What happens here with this application policy is I'm able to define how the outside world connects to my web tier, for example. Do they go through a firewall? Do they go through a load balancer? And then I'm able to also define that how my tiers of my application communicate with each other. The other thing I'm able to define here, you can't really see it, but if I really wanted, for example, you think about this area of the screen being my outside connectivity, for security reasons, I don't want somebody from the outside to be able to come over here and get right to my database, right? I need to have protections between that. The ACI application policy provides that, and again, this is also the way I can provide multi-tenancy as well. I can have another application that uses components and it's not able to jump out and talk between applications or between policies. So that's how that works in terms of the policy. It's then loaded into that APIC controller and it manages the entire network fabric as a system. Now notice something about the way this looks as we show the web tier, the database tier, the app tier. You can see that these live in different parts of our environment, and the reason they live in those different parts of the environment is because they can then be optimized for the platform they might need to run on. So for example, I have database that is running on bare metal. I have some servers running on one hypervisor from one virtualization provider. I have other applications running on other hypervisors. I might have applications running in containers. The APIC is able to enforce that policy because it enforces that policy at the network level. It's able to enforce that policy across multiple types of hypervisors, multiple types of infrastructure. So it's really able to provide that policy-defined network experience, that configuration as a fabric, all of those things across our entire environment, regardless of what that infrastructure looks like. So I mentioned documenting. One of our other customers is Woolworths, which is a grocery store in Australia. One of the things that they were able to do, because they have this documentation now of their applications, you can think of it as kind of a map for the application or a connectivity graph for the application, is they were able to simplify their environment. They were able to provide the same level of security with fewer hardware firewalls. And they were able also to consolidate all of their firewall rules. The reason for that is because when you think about that application network policy, if I decommission an application, I turn that policy away, all of the rules for that application are contained in that policy. So I know that turning that off is not going to affect any of my other applications. So this allows us to be much more efficient in terms of the way that we secure applications, in terms of the way that we manage access between those applications or between those components of those applications. The other thing I mentioned this at the start, the application-centric infrastructure, very open, right? So if you're looking at automation tools, you're looking at orchestration tools, different types of systems management tools, those can all talk to that APIC controller and define network policy. that then gets enforced within the fabric. I talked already about how this works across multiple types of hypervisors, works across bare metal. All of those types of things are in place already. And so we have that very open ecosystem. We have APIs that allow our partners or our customers to program the fabric and really be very, very efficient and very automated in the way the network is managed. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about what makes up that Cisco application-centric infrastructure. These are the components you can see on the slide here. The Cisco Nexus 9000 switches, the APIC controller, the application-centric infrastructure controller. It's actually called the application policy infrastructure controller. That's what holds that policy and enforces that policy. And then those industry-leading partnerships that we talked about before. So you've got the ability to create that services picture, that documentation of the services. You can use that with industry-leading solutions from Cisco or industry-leading solutions from our partners as well. So for example, if you like the capabilities that you get in terms of application control with F5 devices, we're integrated with those. You can integrate those right into the ACI fabric. The ACI fabric, I talked about this a little bit, really strong hardware platform, the Nexus 9000 platform, really designed for this fabric type of environment, but designed to be a very high-performing, very cost-efficient, power-efficient, really network switching infrastructure for the future. It's got some great functionality, and we take advantage of all that functionality in the ACI fabric. So just to kind of wrap up and summarize, Cisco ACI is that perfect network platform to automate your data center, to make it more cloud-like. It's that high-performance, auto-provisioning, policy-based network. Security and automation are very key in an ACI fabric, and it does provide that foundation for a policy-based data center, for much more automation and much more agility. Now, we didn't have a whole lot of time to talk about ACI today. Usually I get a little bit more time than this. So hopefully you've heard something that's of interest to you and you'd like to learn a little bit more about that. Please contact your cStor account team and they can help with that. I think Neil's going to talk a little bit about some incentives to do that as well. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about how customers are already using ACI, we have several case studies, including full details about the Symantec implementation and the Woolworths implementation that I talked about. Those are available on our website. And then if you're in the Phoenix, Arizona area and you'd like to learn a little bit more about this, we are actually going to have a customer workshop. It'll be at the Cisco office in Phoenix on April 20th. The registration link is here in the deck, and you'll get that deck. So just click through on that link and register, and we'd love to see you there. And so that's all I had for today. So I will pass it to Kim and see what questions we have.
Excellent. Thank you so much, George. And thank you for pointing out the case studies and the upcoming workshop. Those are fabulous resources for everyone. At this time, we will open it up for questions. As a reminder, if you have any questions about today's presentation, please post them to the questions pane in the GoToWebinar control panel. So we're just checking out, and we do have a couple of questions coming in, obviously for George. Question 1. Does ACI work for both physical and virtual devices? Great question. I think every company is working in both worlds today.
Yeah, and it is a great question. It's obviously something that's I think top of mind within most IT organizations, right? Virtualization is a fantastic tool. We're seeing several other tools that are going to make our application life cycles more flexible, more automated. Things like containers. ACI, because of the policy and everything like that is in that network fabric itself, is actually works independent of what's running below it. So you can use it for bare metal. You can use it for multiple hypervisors. Today we support vSphere, we support Hyper-V, we support KVM. Look for us to move more into the area of supporting containers. We actually do have some support for containers through something we call Contiv at Cisco. It's an open source initiative around container networking. So yeah, really the design of ACI is such that you can use whatever infrastructure makes the most sense for the application that you're running.
Excellent, thank you. Looks like maybe a follow-on question, which you may have just touched on, but does ACI work with multiple types of virtual environments?
Yeah, it does. So I mentioned the multiple hypervisors. Really, I think we've kind of got the gamut of available hypervisors covered now with VMware, Hyper-V, and KVM. And like I say, as things move more towards containers, we're there as well. One thing I guess I didn't mention is OpenStack. There is integration with OpenStack through the Neutron plugin and in other areas. So that's available today as well.
Excellent, thank you. Looks like we have time for another question or two. We've got a couple more coming in. How much do I need to know about the applications running on my network to really benefit from Cisco ACI?
Yeah, good question. It's a question that I've heard a couple of times before, and I think if you've heard us talk about ACI before as Cisco, a lot of times we'll talk pretty specifically about applications and how this is completely different. If you don't know a lot about your applications, you haven't mapped out your applications, that's okay. You're in good company. A lot of our customers have not mapped out these applications yet. The way that ACI works is ultimately everything running in the ACI fabric is industry standard. We use things like industry standard routing protocols, VXLAN, BGP, all of those types of things. Doesn't really matter, but what does matter is that if you don't know that much about your application and you're currently using things like VLANs to separate and those types of things, you can continue to use those things within ACI as well. You don't have to know inside and outside what your applications need. Now, as you move to newer applications and start to use those within ACI, it's an awesome time to start to learn that, and you can start to actually document that in the policy. So now that's part of the application, and as things change within the application, you just refine that policy. So the answer is to get started. You don't have to know all that much about your applications. As you go forward, you'll learn more about it. You'll start to see some increased analytics and mapping capabilities coming from Cisco and from our ecosystem that will help you to understand what is required to fully know the dependencies on those applications.
Excellent, thank you, George. At this point, we're a little bit short on time.